everyone, it's Amber from The Sensible Mama, and today I'm doing my last video in the 4-part series on miscarriage. What I want to talk about today is the process of trying to conceive and getting through that first trimester of pregnancy after you've had a miscarriage. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what happens when you begin the trying to conceive journey after you've had a miscarriage. I guess the first thing that I want to caution you against is to not associate sex with miscarriage. And that might sound really strange if that thought has never occurred to you, but it did to me, and it made it very, very hard for my husband and I when we decided to try to conceive again. It was almost like I had associated the act of sex with the grief of miscarriage. And so what happened is that even though my husband and I had both agreed that it was time to start trying again, I never seemed to be in the mood. It was just almost a complete turnoff to me. I was just too scared that if we were to have sex and get pregnant again and I had to go through a miscarriage all over again, that I just wouldn't be able to take it. So it was like there were two people living in my brain. There was the one person who said, well, this is what you have to do if you want to be pregnant, and there was the other person that was saying, yeah, but if you do this, you might get pregnant and then you might have a miscarriage again. So although I don't really have any good advice about how to sidestep this problem, I do want to give you a heads up that it could be something that you will deal with, and you really just have to do your best to fight against that, because nothing is worse than trying to conceive and feeling resentful about it and not wanting to engage in the very act that could lead to the pregnancy that leads to your baby. Another tip that I would give would be to start making healthy choices once you start trying to conceive. I think that when we're grieving, we tend to do the opposite, which is we start eating garbage food, comfort food, chocolate, things that taste good and feel good, and we maybe start drinking alcohol to cope with the pain, and we stop exercising because we don't have the motivation. And even though all of that stuff feels good when you're grieving, you pay the consequences later, and it's just not something that you want to deal with. So I think that one of the best things you can do as you start entering that season of life where you're trying to conceive post miscarriage, it's, in my opinion, really important that you start eating right, exercising, and just trying to have a more holistically healthy physical, mental, and emotional regime. I guess another thing that I would say would be really important to work on while you're trying to conceive is to be okay with taking breaks every now and then. Recent studies have shown that stress has an inverse relationship with fertility, meaning the higher your stress level, the less likely you are to get pregnant. So if you want to have the very best chances of getting pregnant again, you want to try to keep your stress low. And I think that when you're putting pressure on yourself to get pregnant and you're constantly stressing out about it, it just becomes too much. Don't get so caught up with the charting and the temping and tracking your ovulation and all of those things that seem so exciting when you're trying to get pregnant the first time. Even though all of those things are really great for helping you find out when is the optimal time to try to conceive, those things can be super overwhelming, and in fact, they can add to your stress that can then damage your ability to get pregnant. The next thing I want to talk about is how to handle that first trimester that can be so triggery and anxiety filled. One of the first things that I think is so important is to be okay with being your own advocate with your healthcare provider. When I got pregnant again, we still didn't know what was the reason of our first miscarriage, and my obstetrician didn't seem super concerned with doing any kind of testing at the beginning stages of my pregnancy to make sure that we were on the right track and things were progressing normally. I had done some of my own research, and I wanted for my doctor to track at least my HCG and my progesterone levels at the beginning of my pregnancy. He kind of shook that off and said, that's really not a big deal. I don't think we need to be tracking all of that. And I could not have disagreed with him more. I wanted to know these numbers, especially because if things like progesterone are low, there are supplements you can take that can actually help you to save your pregnancy. So for me, it really came down to insisting that my doctor draw blood and do these measurements so that I had an idea of where we stood in those first weeks of my pregnancy. As it turned out, at the time that we measured my progesterone, that number should have been around 16, and it was only 8. We were in an emergency situation of we need to get you on progesterone right now. I'm rushing a prescription to you. Go get it filled, get on it today, and don't miss a day. So looking back, I think it's pretty possible that if I had not insisted on doing that blood work, I could have lost my second pregnancy too. It's so important that you feel comfortable speaking up for yourself with your midwife or your obstetrician. And if you don't feel comfortable talking to your healthcare provider about these things, then you need to find a new healthcare provider. Secondly, I think it's really important to know what is normal during a pregnancy, because sometimes normal things can feel scary and they can cause you to stress out. One thing to know that is pretty normal during pregnancy is spotting and a little bit of bleeding. You need to know ahead of time that there can be spotting and blood, and that's normal. A good rule of thumb that I learned from my midwife was that unless you are filling a pad within an hour, then you shouldn't be super concerned. It's probably normal. Another thing that I learned through my own pregnancy is that pregnancy symptoms can come and go. Your breast tenderness can go away and then return. So can your nauseousness. So can even your baby bump. So it's good to know those things ahead of time so that if they happen to you, you don't panic. I think the most helpful thing for me when I was in my first trimester in terms of just my sanity and my emotional well-being was picking up a hobby that would occupy my mind. So I had never played a guitar before, but I decided that I was gonna go buy a really cheap guitar and start teaching myself how to play. And all through my pregnancy, I devotedly, every time I felt anxious or scared or nervous about my pregnancy, I picked up my guitar and I started learning. It just had this wonderful effect of clearing my mind of all of the stress and anxiety. And an added benefit is that at the end of my pregnancy, I'm like a pretty good guitar player now. The last thing that I would recommend is to join online support groups that can help you walk through the scary stages of your pregnancy, but do so with caution. I cannot recommend Baby Center more. I love Baby Center. I'm a group owner and a big sis there. I just love participating on those forums. So I don't want to knock forums like Baby Center because I think they are great. But the only thing that I would caution you about is just take everything that you see there with a grain of salt. When you join a birth board, there will be people who will miscarry their babies. There will be people who will have the exact same symptoms as you, and they will lose their babies and you won't. So join the support groups, but if it ever gets to a point where that support group is stressing you out because you're having to witness sad things that are happening to other people, be willing to step away for a little while. So that's really all that I have. My hope is that if you're beginning the journey of trying to conceive, that maybe you'll see this video and learn from some of the things that I learned the hard way so that you have a little bit easier of a path than I had. Just know that you're not alone. And there are a lot of us who have been down that road, and we feel what you're going through. Thanks for tuning in these 4 weeks. I hope it's been helpful to know that there are other people who have stories similar to yours. I hope you learned something, and I hope that this was as positive for you as it was for me. I'll see you next time.